Does Deuteronomy 6:4 teach that God is one person? Okay, that's the question for tonight. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Now, that's normally how it's translated, but what I'm going to go over today is that I believe that the NRSV has it correct. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Okay, so the Lord alone should be the proper translation. Now, why is that? If we look here and if we look here at the Old Testament survey by Laser, Hubbard, and Bush, it says, this out of the way, it says the creed sets for the unity of the uniqueness of Yahweh. So Deuteronomy 6:4 was a creed for the Jews, right? They would say it as soon as they get up in the morning, and uh, as soon as they lie down to go to bed. It's the first thing they say when they come into the house, when they leave the house. It's Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. So it's a creed. It's the creed of Israel. The creed sets for the unity and uniqueness of Yahweh, the God of Israel, specifically in the relationship established between him and his people. The word used for one is the numeral literally, the Lord our God, the Lord one. So it's saying that the word one is just the numeral for the number one. Okay. Now let's keep going on though. If this passage specifically taught monotheism, another Hebrew word could have been used. Hence, the Lord our God, there's a typo there. The Lord our God is the only God, is the only God. That's the sense that we should understand Deuteronomy 6:4. At the same time, Deuteronomy 6:4 does exclude any concept of polytheism, for God is not many but one. Above all, there is an exclusiveness about Yahweh, which demands total love, loyalty, commitment, and dedication from his people. The creed does not set forth monotheism as a philosophical idea, but it certainly sets for the Lord as the only God the Israelite could love. To love him with all the heart and soul and might leaves no place for devotion to another God. So he's the only God. So that's the purpose of Deuteronomy 6:4, is to show that only Yahweh is God. Now, does that specifically tell us how many persons Yahweh is? No, it does not. So here's a commentary by Robert Alter. Some translators render echad, the word one, as alone, but the evidence that this common Hebrew numeral ever meant that is questionable. So he does not necessarily agree with the translation alone. However, he does accept the concept that it should be understood as alone. Because look what he says. The statement stands then, as it has been traditionally construed, as a ringing declaration of monotheism. Both Rashi and Abraham ibn Ezra point to Zechariah 14:9 as an indication that in days to come, the Lord our God will be recognized as the one God by all. So they're using Zechariah 14:9 as a proof text on how to understand Deuteronomy 6:4. And what does it say? And the Lord will become king over all the earth. On that day, the Lord will be one, echad, and his name one. So does this mean that God is going to become one person someday? No. It means that he will be the only God worshiped in the earth when the day of judgment comes. He will be the only one. Okay, so that's how we should understand Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, that Yahweh alone is God. Okay, so in the broader context of the book of Deuteronomy is that God had the Israelites be in the wilderness for 40 years, right? And so he's using Moses to tell the next generation of Israelites that they are not to worship other gods, the gods of the inhabitants of the land that they are about to inherit, that only God, only Yahweh is their God, and they should only worship him. Okay? Now, if you notice in the book of Judges that they did not drive out the Canaanites from the land. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, but look, as you can see in Judges chapter 1, verses 28 to 31, looking at verse 31, Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Acco or the inhabitants of Sidon or of Mahalab or Achizib or Helba, so on and so forth. But the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. So they didn't drive out the inhabitants of the land. So they were co-mingling and co-inhabiting the land with pagans. Okay. So with that being said, the pagans had other gods that the Israelites ended up worshiping, unfortunately. Now let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, or the Lord alone. Let's look at the broader context of Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting at verse 10. Then it shall come about when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you great and splendid cities which you did not build, and houses full of all good things which you did not fill, and carved cisterns which you did not carve out, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you eat and are satisfied. Now watch this. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name alone. You shall not follow other gods, any of the gods of the people who surround you. Look at that. For the Lord your God, who is in the midst of you, is a jealous God. And his anger is kindled. The anger of your God, of the Lord your God, will be kindled against you, and he will wipe you off the face of the earth. So that's the whole purpose of Deuteronomy, is to show that only Yahweh is God. Only Yahweh. And so going back to the presentation here, in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 29 through chapter 13 and verse 11, I'm not going to read the whole thing, just the parts of it. He says, take care that you be not ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? That I also may do the same. All right. And then in chapter 13, he talks about a dreamer and a dreamer of dreams who performs miracles in front of you, but then they say, let us go after other gods. No, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. So doesn't that sound like Deuteronomy 6:5? Yes, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Right? God is testing you to see, he's testing the Israelites to see if they are only going to serve him. So it's not telling us how many persons God is, but it's just telling us that he alone is God. Let us go. So if your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or your wife, the wife you embrace, or your friend who is as your own soul entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which neither of you nor your fathers have known, some of the gods of the peoples who are around you. So that's the context of Deuteronomy. Michael Brown, in his objection, is answering Jewish objections to Jesus in volume 2. He gives a midrash. He quotes a midrash, which is an ancient Jewish commentary on Deuteronomy 6:4. It says, quote, he expressed his fear, so this is talking about Jacob, or also known as Israel. Jacob, at the end of his life, in Genesis chapter 49, I believe it is, or Genesis 50, when Jacob is about to die, and all of his sons, all of his 12 sons are around him, and he's worried that they're going to worship other gods. So it says he expressed his fear that possibly one of his sons would not remain faithful to the Lord. His sons all replied to him. So this is their response to Israel, or Jacob. Hear, O Israel, Jacob our father, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Just as in your heart there is only one, Echad, so also in our hearts there is only one. So again, only Yahweh is God. So that doesn't tell us how many persons God is. All it tells us is that the Lord alone, the Yahweh alone, should be worshiped. Whether he's triune or whether he's one person, it's a moot point. It doesn't exclude the idea that God is three persons. Thank you.